It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. And if you're watching us on YouTube, yeah, we do look a little different. I love this new layout.
Yeah, it looks good. I mean, I didn't even notice it was new until you mentioned it. So good. Obviously, I'm super observant about this kind of thing.
He's just locked in on the film. That's all he's doing right now. just grinding away. We'll get to the offense in a little bit. It was very, very frustrating day offensively, as you could imagine. The tape certainly confirming that. Let's start with the defense, though, Logan. And it was frustrating in a different way because I think down in, down out, this defense played really, really well. Obviously, they have the short field off the Zacchaeus muffed punt, and then that last drive, just an incredible throw by Russ on the 3rd and 9 to Pickens for the touchdown. And we can talk about that play a little bit more, or in a little bit more detail. But, what went wrong with the defense? They gave up 28. They did, but it's one of those that I think down in, down out, they play really well. And then there's some big spots where things go sideways. So how do you try to make sense of a performance like that?
Yeah, I mean, I really think they did a great job. Why do I say that? So one of the things I'd say first off is I'm always a big believer in, like, how did the team play, specifically for the defense? And I think when you look at the snap totals, there's 79 defensive snaps and there's 64 offensive snaps for the Commanders. And so one of the things is I felt like, especially in the second half of this ball game, it's not, we'll talk about this more when we get to the offense, but there's a field position issue that's happening. And I think when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of how they play close games, they're really good at playing the field position battle. And I felt like there was a period where it just became like that the offense couldn't sustain drives in the second half of the football game, and the defense was on the field a lot. And you're just giving a pretty good offense a lot of bites at the apple late in the game, because, like, if you look at the down to down, like when you just watch, and we've talked about this before, when you just watch through the plays, you're like, this is a great tackle. This is a good fit. This is good coverage. This is a great call. Like, and you just kind of go through it and you're like, okay, good. And like, I think I remember telling you, I used to do like red and green grades, like for offense and defense. Yep. And so I do the same thing, and you're like, there's a lot of green in here. You know what I mean? There's a lot of green in this tape, and you're like, wow, what a blitz here by Frankie on second and whatever, or first and whatever, and it gets him to 2nd and 20. Great job. And look at this coverage down the field. Great like running and pulling the ball out on the goal line. Like, there was some really cool things here. It just, I think in the late game scenario, and it kind of felt inevitable to me, like when the Commanders punted from their end zone, I was like, they're going to get the ball at the 50. They got a short field. They're probably going to score here. And even on that drive, like, great job getting to a 3rd and 9. Like, great job playing coverage, getting to a 3rd and 9. And then obviously Benjamin St. Juste gives up the touchdown, which we can talk about in more detail in a second. But its defense is so hard, I think, because it doesn't take a lot to have a quote unquote bad game or a lack, like a low level performance. It's like literally like in this game, it's a handful of plays, and right. And even on those plays, like even the George Pickens touchdown, I'm like, I don't know if I'm a coach, like what I'm telling Noah to do differently on that necessarily. Like, It's a great throw. It's a great catch. And there's stuff like that happens all the time in this game. And there's a couple things we'll talk about here where it's, like the Warren, like, check down versus the blitz, where it's like, that looks like a mental mistake to me. There's a couple of those, but I think on the whole, just thinking back to what this team was week 1 versus Tampa Bay, it's like night and day. Like, they're a fast, physical, confident group. And I just felt like the Commanders didn't play what they normally do, which is excellent complementary football. And the defense kind of had to carry the bag a little bit. And I think they did a good job for 3.5 quarters. And then when they had to kind of finish it, I don't think they got enough support from the offense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think the frustrating part is the 3.5 quarters thing has kind of been the tail as of late. And like against Chicago, it works out because you hit the Hail Mary. If they get the call on the 4th down on 4th and 9 to Ertz, and then they go kick a field goal, it kind of works out here. And so, finish Fridays. They won't have one this week because they play on Thursday. But, that is one of Dan's themed days. They got to continue to figure out how to do that. And I think finishing drives, like, that's the frustrating thing too, is they got in some good down and distances. And then on some 3rd downs, whether it's two huge mental mistakes, that Warren play that we'll talk about in a second, the check down, and then, BSJ, who, look, I don't want to turn it into the whole BSJ podcast, but like, down in, down out, that dude played a really good game. Like some of the times he is locking George Pickens down in coverage, you're like, that is good stuff. And the ball just goes somewhere else. But on 3rd and 9 late in the game, as Benjamin said in the post-game locker room, like he needs to play the fade there. He knows that's what they want to do. He doesn't. It's a ridiculous throw by Russ, and it's a great catch by Pickens, and ball game. It's not over at that point because of what ensued after, but there goes your lead. And so I think that's the kind of the frustrating thing is like, we can both acknowledge that playing defense is stupidly hard because like as a D lineman, I think this is the easiest example. You can get your butt kicked, if they play 70 snaps, 67 snaps, but if you get a sack on the other 3 and you have a 3-sack game, everyone's like, oh, what a game by that guy. Yeah. But that's the margins for everyone on defense. And so figuring out how to not have the big plays hurt you is unfortunately a very difficult but realistic expectation that you have to have if you want to be a great defense.
Yeah, and I think that's something we even talked about on the preview show. Like Benjamin St. Juste is going to have a PI, and he's probably going to give up a touchdown at some point. But that's like who he is. And I think, again, we talked about in the post game, like Marshawn Lattimore being here. Like this is so again, like you didn't shadow him every down, BSJ, but he was on George Pickens for the majority of the game. And I'd say George Pickens was relatively quiet in this game when BSJ was covering him. And so obviously, like, good job, good job making sure that their best player is not impacting the game. And again, it's not just him. It's good job by Joe Wood Jr. calling coverages and giving Russ different looks and the rush getting home. So it's a team effort for sure, but good job. And then again, like in a critical situation, he shows up, and it's hard to. I had a coach tell me one time, like I remember I had a fumble in a game. It was against the Giants, had a fumble. And outside of the fumble, I played excellent. Like it was one of my best great on a per snap play graded. And so he gave me my grade, and it was like a 95%. And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, as like this is your per play grade. But as like some plays are more impactful than others. And then he just left and kind of like made me feel bad because I was like, oh yeah, like I basically lost the game for us because I fumbled. And so I think that's kind of what's going on here. It's like, yeah, per snap, very good. But in this critical moment, like we got to make it. And I'm sure he knows that. Dan knows it. Joe Wood Jr. knows it. But I think it's somewhat unfair to like criticize the rest of his performance because of this play. I think is what I'm getting at. And I'm not here to defend him, but we just talked about how like not all plays are created equal. And he'll be the first to tell you, like he's got to make that. But I do think like in terms of like people in the comments post game was like, why is he still here? Like he's playing good football. He's making good run fits. He's being more aggressive in coverage. Like that's all good. Now it's like, can he take that next step and kind of evolve in these big moments? And we'll see.
Yeah, and I think this is the crap luck of playing defensive back, right? So in this game, down in, down out, he was their best corner. PFF grade bears it out. Watching the film, I think you and I would both grade him out higher than the other two guys. Not
that they played bad. Like
not that they played bad, but like I mean, and the first touchdown of Pickens on Noah. If like in the moment, I was like, what is he doing? Like he just doesn't have any idea where the ball is. And then you realize he's playing perfect. Noah is. Perfect coverage to where George Pickens looks like he's jumping, and George Pickens gets to the apex of his jump and switches where his hands are. So Noah is playing one shoulder, the ball is over there, and you're like, okay, that dude's a freak. Like, what are we going to do with that?
Dude, I was standing in the end zone, like standing behind the end zone, and that ball came out, and I was like, oh, like Russ missed it because it's like kind of airing instead of toward the corner, it's airing toward like the back of the end zone, and the adjustment on the ball like was just
it's crazy.
Was incredible. And I know he's a little bit of like he seems like an errant personality, Jordan Pickens, but golly, can he play football? Like that is like a one-of-one adjustment to the football, which is
Anthony,
really impressive.
My producer on the radio show, had a really funny line. He's like, yeah, that dude's spectacular catch rating in Madden has got to be like a 99. Like that's his one trick, but what a trick.
Yeah.
And to that point, the other deep ball that BSJ gives up to Pickens is you could not place that ball better. Like he's in tremendous position, but again, like BSJ's lack of ball skills, if you're in that good a position, you gotta make a play on the ball. But the ball like seemingly goes through Benjamin's hands. It's an incredible catch by Pickens, but he's again in a good spot. There are other plays in that game where Sainristil and Igbenogany get lucky because Russ misses and the coverage is not as tight. The coverage is not as good. but that's playing cornerback. Sometimes the rush gets home and your mistake gets covered up. Sometimes the quarterback misses and your less than perfect coverage doesn't wind up mattering. And sometimes you're in excellent position and the ball is placed perfectly and you wind up on a highlight reel for all the wrong reasons. And that's, even like the Chin interception, Sainer still gets beat on a double move there. Like Chin does a really good job of covering for it. And maybe Mikey knows he's got the help.
It's a bad ball by Russ.
Yeah, it's a bad ball. And so like, you can't just play the results. You have to play the process because the process will win out over time. But we also have seen the results over time with Benjamin St-Juste in the big spots. He's given up some stuff. And I think, like your fumble example is interesting because I don't know when in the game that fumble was. But like I'll use Olamide Zaccheaus, right? He doesn't realize at the time that punt is coming down to him, the one that he loses on the muff, that like, oh, this could be a huge play in the game.
Right.
But it becomes one because it gives Pittsburgh a short field.
Right.
On 3rd and 9 with the game on the line, that's a big play. Like we all know in the moment. And that's the one. That's, I think, why it hurts so much and why the frustration level is so high is like this didn't suddenly out of nowhere become a big play in the game.
Yeah.
We knew it going in, and that was the result.
Yeah, and again, like why, like you're just looking at it, you're like, why did he play it that way? And again, I think Mike Williams does a good job. It's kind of the same thing that Terry did to Deontay Banks on the in the Giants game, where you where they throw the fade, right? The inside stem, you push vertical, you give a little bit of a head shake, and I think the corner thinks because he's playing the sticks, it's 3rd and 9, he's thinking out. Right? I'm going to run out to the sticks. And then instead of running it out, he just takes it vertical. It's not a true double move, but again, like it speaks to the value of a good stem because like when you square that DB up, he can go dig, he can go out, and he's by himself. He's on an island completely because the safety's pushing to the 3 receiver side. So did he play it correctly? No. Does he need to make the play? Yes. But that's a good football player. That was a good throw. And you'd like him to make that play. And I hate to kind of boil it down to that because I was just thinking about this. Like Jeremy Chin had an excellent football game, but he gives up a touchdown in a situation where it seems like obviously there's going to be a pick play happening. And am I going to be mad at Jeremy? No, because that's great execution by Pittsburgh. But those are things where it's like those in a game like this, defensively, those are the inches that when you stack them together are the difference between a 1-point loss and a 1-point win.
100%. Let's talk about the drive that I think is the most critical, or I'm going to call it the turning point. So Washington goes in, scores right before the half. They come out and then score again. It's 24-14 now.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. We're rolling. If you get a stop here, who knows? Maybe you keep the momentum going. Or at the very least, you're holding a 10-point lead much deeper into the 3rd quarter. And now Pittsburgh can't run the ball as much. Now Pittsburgh is playing a style of football that they are not as comfortable nor as good at. Instead, they give up a touchdown drive on a drive where they had a bunch of good down and distances, and then they keep making mistakes. Let's see, where was this? Here we go. So they get a Najee Harris run, and then Armstrong does a really good job forcing it. Russ misses the tight end. That was another one where Igbenogany got lucky on a bad throw. And then we get in this 3rd and 8 where Jaylen Warren winds up picking up, I think it's 26 yards on a little dump off by Russ. What happened there to allow a really great situation turn into what was the start of the real start of a touchdown drive?
Yeah, so they're playing man coverage and they're bringing kind of this weak side cross dog. So what I mean by that is, so basically, Bobby Wagner is up in the line of scrimmage to the offensive left. He's not up in the line of scrimmage, but he's going to attack the offensive left A gap. And so on the snap, he attacks the inside shoulder of the guard, rips across his face. Frankie Louvu's looping around because now in the slide, the guard is now attached to Bobby and the tackle's blocking the defensive end. So they've done a really good job cultivating a rush lane for Frankie. So Frankie is absolutely screaming to the football. Warren acts like he's going to block and then kind of just slips by him. And then again, Russell does a great job just kind of getting the ball out, kind of, like a little kind of pop pass over the top and is completed to Warren. So I don't know their exact rules on this, but to me, it would look like either Frankie needs to account for the running back somehow on this. And it's easier like when the running back flares right now, like runs like a wheel, because then you can see it. You're like, oh, I need to make sure I'm out there with this guy. the other thing is because it looks like he's blocking, he says, "Oh, I'm going to beat the block," and attacks the inside shoulder. And obviously, like, they had kind of schemed that up, and the ball's out. So I would assume, just based on the coverage structure, that one of those linebackers or that defensive end, needs to account for that running back. Now, it's not super clear who is it supposed to be, what exactly is the kind of response supposed to be from those three guys, but they're in straight man coverage with a deep safety. Like, someone's got that guy in coverage. So obviously they don't cover him. There's nobody around. The guy's running into the defense with nobody near him, and obviously Quan makes a great tackle to keep him from scoring a touchdown. But that was one of those plays. It's pivotal. It's 3rd and 8, right? If you get them off the field there, like, they got a punt. So obviously really critical down and distance there. And then the other one, like, because you mentioned there was a couple. There's a 2nd and 20.
Yeah, so the next play after that is Dante Fowler has a really great sack. He just kind of, like, it's funny because the tackle, like, tries to push him inside, and Dante's like, okay, thanks for the boost. I was in a loop anyway. Squeezes through like 6 guys that are all mushed together, pops out and sacks Russ. So it's a minus 10 yards. Now it's 2nd and 20. And this is the big Pickens play. I'm going to call it, for the purposes of mental picture here, on Mike Sainer still, but what actually happens on the back end here to allow George Pickens to get free. Obviously, some of this is missed tackles that tacks on a bunch of yardage at the end, but why is he so open in the first place?
Yeah, so it's hard to tell the exact coverage they're in, but they're in empty. So they're in a two receivers to the left, 3 receivers to the right, and usually you kind of push that safety, the post safety, to the 3 receiver side, because that's where the offensive concepts work. So you end up kind of in a match on the weak side. So a match is like kind of going to play like man. And there are different variations of that. Some people call it lock, whatever you want to call it, where it's like 2 for 2. And however we get to 2 for 2, that's fine. And then Bobby Wagner is going to be kind of like the plug player, the hook player underneath. And he's probably going to work to the quarterback's eyes. So when that happens, like, George runs up, attacks the outside shoulder of Mike Sanderstill. Sanderstill gets width, and then he runs a dig. And there's nobody there, right? The safety's pushed to the 3 receiver side. Bobby's pushed over there because I think Russell does a good job of kind of working his eyes. Then comes back to the dig. It's the classic Drew Brees completion where we got the primary concept over here. We got the backside dig, and we're going to drill that home. And so Sanderson's a little bit off. They missed the tackle because of the space, and ends up being a big play. So that's one where, again, they're kind of playing like a zone. And usually in empty, they check to cover 2. But for whatever reason this week, they didn't want to do that. Or Tampa 2, they didn't want to do that. Because, again, if they're in Tampa 2 there, that accounts for that in cut, right? Frankie Louvu or Bobby Wagner is going to be right there. But for whatever reason, their plan this week wasn't to do that. And there's a nice completion in this kind of 3 structure versus empty, and at least to a big play.
Yeah. So if that wasn't bad enough, you had a 3rd and 8, go big. 2nd and 20, go big. Then the next play, handoff for 2 yards. And the play after that, you got a nice coverage, force incompletion, should set up a 3rd and 8. One problem, Dante Fowler went early. So 3rd and 8 becomes 2nd and 3, and then 2 plays later, Najee Harris walks into the end zone for a touchdown. And instead of 24-14 your ball because you don't mess up a blitz or you'll force a punt, maybe you even wind up getting pinned deep after that 2nd and 20, whatever. It's now 24-21 and
it's
game
a ball
on.
game.
And
it's a ball
that
game.
To me is like such a critical point in this game. And so again, that's not to say that the St. Juice incompletion or Johnny Newton jumping off sides or any of these other things. It's in a 1-point game. It's not any one of them. It's all of them, because any one of them could have changed the game. That is the nature of a 1-point game. It's just, the St. Juice and the Newton of it all happened later. So there's there's less time to undo it. But to me, like, that was the critical drive of the game. And it happens early in the 3rd quarter. And you had so many opportunities. And unfortunately, I think the theme has to be, if you're DQ and Joe Witt this week, it's like, guys, we preach finishing for a reason. We got to finish. And they just down in, down out, really good football, didn't finish drives.
Yeah, 100%. And this one's frustrating because I think it's a couple like mistakes, kind of, like it's missed tackles, it's offsides, it's who's got the back, and that's extremely frustrating because that's like something. And again, we talked about it before, like for the most part pretty clean, but there's a couple of these moments where you're like, these are back-breaking plays. And everyone talks about the Johnny Newton thing, and you just made me think of it. Like, they did a great job on 1st and 2nd down in that sequence of keeping Pittsburgh. I think it was 3rd and whatever, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, whatever it was. And then they run that kind of weird gun run to Cordell Patterson to get you to 4th and 1. Like, if you play that a little bit better, and again, that's a tough look, you're probably okay. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you tackle him, for a 4-yard gain and it's 4th and 6. Are they doing anything there that's going to make you scared?
No, they're probably just punting.
They're going to punt, and you're going to be okay. And so, again, like in for defense, it's a game of inches, quite literally. And it's so hard to play defense. You can't have these unforced errors. And I do think that obviously the completion of Pickens is a great job by Russ, great job by Pickens. But, can you play the technique better? And there's been a couple times this year where Sanderson, I think, is having a very solid year. But there's been a couple times where you can tell playing outside, he doesn't quite understand where his help is or what his leverage is or what the exact – and it's not all the time because he's a very smart football player, but it shows up in the Giants game. Something similar happened. And it's one or two times a game. But it's like – man, like if we play that a little bit better, is that ball completed? Are we in a good spot? So lots of things like that. And everyone, we're going to be hyper aware of those things in a loss. But every single game this year, there's been stuff like that, that has not bit you in the butt. But against a good football team like Pittsburgh, you can't afford some of these mistakes. And I do think the defense played comparatively a relatively more clean game than the offense, but still these things are significant.
Yeah, I came my blood pressure was high after watching the offensive film. I was frustrated. I was like, this is annoying. After watching the defensive film, it was kind of like, damn. Yeah. Like, that was a good performance. Yeah. And they just here and there. They also did some other interesting stuff. Just real quick, couple of final notes that I just found in my notes. They moved Daron Payne outside more in this game than I think they ever have. I can confirm with the PFF alignments. I can either do that right now or just do it randomly in my head and have that stat for next time. But like they definitely put him out on the edge a lot more in this game, which I thought was really interesting. And from a run defense standpoint, Pittsburgh ran the ball 43 times. They averaged 3.3 a carry, and their long was, I think, 12. Like, this run defense is suddenly pretty good. And they also did some other cool stuff. Like there's one play where like Payne was isolated on the outside and Frankie Louvu just like fires down into the double team. Typically, like, hey, we don't want the double team to get to the linebacker. And here it's like, no, we're gonna take control of the situation and make sure that our D linemen have one-on-ones because we think they can win those. And Frankie's just gonna basically kamikaze himself down into the line. So like, there's some cool stuff that they're doing against the run that has helped shore up this run defense. And obviously the pass defense down and down out has been pretty good for a number of weeks now. So they're continuing to find ways to improve, and whether it's personnel, whether it's schematic, like it is continually going the right direction. Again, they have to finish. No one should be like, hey, they gave up 28 points. Everything's awesome. But realistically, like over time, you also see how they gave up very low point totals to a lot of bad football teams where like those games weren't even close because of how well this defense continues to evolve and come together.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, got to give a lot of credit to Joe Wood Jr. because I think they did some good stuff in terms of stopping the run. Like there was a couple times where I was like, how are they going to play 13 personnel in the week? Because like obviously Pittsburgh ran a lot of it. There's a couple times where they come down with a 4-man front and then 2 overhang players and then the safety in the box and Bobby Wagner. So Frankie's on one edge. They've got another player on the strong edge of the formation, and it's like we're going to gap you out. We're basically playing like a 6-2 front, which is something you see like in high school. You don't see that so much in the NFL anymore. And it's like good luck, and I think they didn't do it all the time, but it was a nice kind of change up. And then they were in their 3-down structure quite a bit in terms of 3 interior guys and the 2 edge players and safeties in the box. And on that one play with Frankie, like Chin is the run fit player, excuse me. And so he's screaming downhill, and I think they just did a good job of having a plan and knowing who their opponent was. And I thought that was cool to see too. Like them kind of kind of change what they've been doing and kind of fit it to Pittsburgh, and then put Pittsburgh in a tough spot to in terms of rushing efficiency.
All right. Anything else from the defense that you wanted to touch on before we flip sides of the ball?
We're going to talk about this more in the Philly preview, obviously, which is coming out tomorrow. Yeah. And, but they got some, it's good that they're playing better because they're going to have a tough ask this week. So
yeah, Philly, some of the specific things. I don't know that Philly's an overall better football team than Washington, but I do know that some of the stuff that Philly does well scares the bejesus out of me. So we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Real quick note, like I was watching the film, like we've played some good football teams this year. The Commanders have, Baltimore, obviously Pittsburgh's very good. For a per person basis, this is definitely the most talented team, like on, individually that we've seen this year. So that's going to be interesting to see how Joe Witt Jr. gets in his bag and gets that done.
Yeah, so that'll be tomorrow. As for now, let's talk about the offense. Take command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. This offense, Logan, did put up 27 points on a very, very good Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They put up 17 in the first half. But they ultimately slowed down in the second, and it just was a frustrating offensive tape to watch for me. What about for you? What stood out? Like, what's as you put the tape down eventually? Like, what's the top line of your notes, if you will?
Yeah. So usually, you come out and it's the simplest thing that is the reason why something wasn't good. And they just, to me, in this game had too many negative plays. So literally negative yardage plays. I think this is the most negative yardage plays they've had all season, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's something I think they had 9 in this game or something like that, and they had 52 all season.
Yeah,
I think was the number.
Yeah, so obviously that's a huge thing. So that's sacks, that's rushing efficiency. Also, I think the other thing that sticks out to me is there was just too many drops, kind of near misses in terms of the passing game. And while this offense is very talented and very good, it's the same thing with the defense. Against a more talented opponent, you can't miss on those. You can't miss those opportunities. And I'm not saying anything that Jayden Daniels or Dan Quinn or Kliff Kingsbury doesn't know. And probably a lot of the fans know that too. But you got to give, and we're going to talk about this more in more detail, but you got to give credit to Pittsburgh because of how quickly they played, the game plan they came up with. They really changed a lot of what they did to kind of affect Jayden Daniels. So kudos to them. But in a game like this, every single play is important, and there just were too many, what I would say is negative or neutral plays that didn't help you kind of progress the offense down the field.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that you bring up there that are worth fleshing out a little bit. One that I'll circle back to in a second is Pittsburgh changing it up, because Jayden was asked after the game directly, did they do anything different? He was like, no, it's what we expected. And I feel like players say that in part because they don't want to, it feels like, it was crazy, or coach just didn't tell us any of this stuff was going to happen. Then you're kind of throwing your coach under the bus, or it can be perceived that way, even though it's not actually throwing your coach under the bus. Everyone watches the tape. The tape was the tape. You can anticipate maybe some changes, but Pittsburgh really did, especially in the first half, I feel like, bring a little bit more pressure and do some interesting things that they don't typically do. So I feel like, well, actually, let's just start there. Let's just start with that in terms of the schematic and maybe even not even schematic, but play calling differences of the Pittsburgh that played Washington versus what they had shown on tape.
Yeah, so I agree with Jayden to a certain extent. They played cover 3 and they played man, which is what they do all the time. They are a man cover 3 team, and they're going to stop the run. That's what at their core, that's who they are. I think the thing that sticks out to me is just they were in more 5-man pressures than they've been in all year. They were kind of hey, we're going to stop the run and we're going to bring pressures. And in passing situations, obviously they get into their 4-man rush structures, which were very, very effective. And we talked about that post game. Watching those 4 guys rush the passer was fun for me to watch as a fan of football. They're on the same page. Cam Hayward, what is he in year 14 or 15? I
think it's actually year 753.
Dude, and he looks like he's an amazing football player. His power, his strength, his read and react ability. Obviously, TJ Watt. Highsmith is a guy that does not get enough credit, man. He's awesome. Really good football player. And then Keanu Benton was excellent. So that front was excellent. But in terms of just we're gonna play kind of our odd structure, which they don't do a ton of. We're gonna play our odd structure. We're gonna rush 5, and we're gonna really put Jayden in the heater in a way that we haven't done prior to this year. I think they had the lowest blitz percentage in the NFL coming into this game, and so for them to bring 19 5-man rushes in this game is statistically way higher than it would normally be. But in terms of the coverage structure, the man, the cover 3, the aggressive press on the outside, that's who they are. But I'm saying in terms of maybe a better way to put it, in terms of how they applied it with the pressure stuff, that's maybe a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Like just the couple of slight changes were good, and it also created matchups. Because the other thing with Pittsburgh is Robert Mays had this stat on the Athletic Football Show. They led or not led. What's the opposite? They're worst in the league of unblocked pressures, right?
Yes.
In terms of generating free runners, they only had 5 coming into the game. 5, because they don't blitz like that.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're last in the league in pressures. They just don't get free runners in the way that other teams do, where they kind of sell out. And it's, the Commanders get a decent amount of those where they're able to get someone free and just, come in. And, something we didn't even talk about with the defense, like some of the key penalties, like Shin had that roughing call, like it's an unblocked pressure. Unfortunately, it ends poorly for Washington. But like the way Pittsburgh gets pressure is they kick your ass. Like, the tackles in this game, and we'll talk about the run game a little bit more here in a second. And I think that's where Trent Scott showed up a little bit more, and not necessarily in a great way, where it's like, yeah, this guy's a 4th tackle and you're going to have to do the best you can. But for as great as Brandon Coleman was 2 weeks ago, he had a really tough time with Alex Highsmith. It was like Alex Highsmith is a veteran, excellent player, and he saw a rookie and he was matched up with him one-on-one a ton, and he just bullied him, because that's what happens sometimes to rookies in the NFL. It doesn't make me change my long-term purview on Brandon Coleman, but like dude's falling all over the place, getting bull rushed, missed assignments, all of it. And Pittsburgh had a really good plan. Again, not necessarily to just get free runners everywhere, but to create the matchups they want that they knew they could win, and then they went and won them.
No, I think that's 100% right. And I think we talked about it post-game, talked about it now. They're a good defense, and they played like a good defense, and they played like a Steelers defense. And like there's this cultural weight, like when you play Pittsburgh, when you play Baltimore, like as a former player, like it was the same thing. You go into Baltimore or go into Pittsburgh, and it's going to be like a mouthpiece chin strap, like it's going to be a 4-round heavyweight fight. And that's just how they've always been. And so kudos to Mike Tomlin for cultivating that culture. And then couple that with a guy who understands defense at a high level. Like you're going to get a tough matchup for the offense. And it did feel like, just watching on the field, that it felt a little bit like a playoff game is what it felt like to me when I was watching on the sideline. It just had a little bit more juice. And I think I don't know. No one would ever admit this, but I think maybe that just little slight uptick in intensity, is maybe why Brandon Coleman struggles a little bit, because it's not like there's certain times he knows what to do. It's just he's not doing it fast enough. He's not doing it with enough urgency. The slight incompletions that Jayden's got in the game, like just a little bit geeked up. The windows are a little bit tighter. The defensive line's compressing that pocket a little bit more. And that's kind of what it felt like to me, and it just felt like there was just a little uptick, and everyone was even like Luke McCaffrey. Like I haven't seen Luke drop a ball since he's been here. And he drops that one on the sideline. You know what I mean? Like, which is kind of like it's a late throw.
You think that was a drop or versus a PBU?
So when you slow it down, like I went back and watched it, like it's ball right through his hands, hits him in the chest, and the receiver punches through. Yeah. So again, like that's one where you're like, man, like he doesn't do that usually. And then Zach, like when was the last time you saw Zach like drop a ball ever?
Hit him in the chest.
And so like brutal. He never does that. And I think it's just there was a slight. Like it was just a little bit more urgent. I've been a part of teams where we're kind of punching above our weight, and that extra little bit of urgency, like it was subconscious, right? But you miss some stuff. And that's to me, and again, maybe I'm projecting based on my past experience, which is probably exactly what I'm doing. But like that's what it felt like to me, watching the bench, watching the field. And this is good because ultimately you learn from this and you say, we do have another gear. We can get there. And like, how do we make sure we're ready for these big games? Because there's a big one coming up on Thursday. Like, I bet you this team will feel that and be ready to go because they've just done it.
Yeah, I think whether it's the subconscious adrenaline, if you will, that you're talking about, or just the task is a little bit harder. There's a little more weight on the bar, if you will.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Whether it is subconscious, mental, whether it is truly physically just more difficult, like they were definitely sped up in a way that they have not been basically since Tampa, even in their losses, even against Baltimore. Like it didn't feel out of control. It's just like they had guys who made plays and, whatever. This felt a little bit sped up. And by the way, they scored more points in this game than they did against Baltimore. So they did it or found ways in a lot of ways, but the consistency down in, down out was not there in the same way. And had it been, they probably scored 40 in this game because there are definitely some missed opportunities that we can get to here in a second. Just real quick before I lose this train of thought, then I want to talk about the run game. Although these things go together, I think to a point. Like, man, not just the guys that you've already mentioned, like some of the players on this defense. One, Patrick Queen had the game of the year for him. He has not had a good year. That is easily. I was talking with Brooke Pryor, who I had on the show last week, ESPN's reporter for the Steelers. Afterwards, yesterday we were texting, and she's like, "Yeah, that's the best game PQ's played all year, bar none, not even close." So he was awesome. The speed that he plays with and his ability to chase some things down, major. But I'll tell you, the guy that you shouted out in the preview show that I came away just blown away at how good he is. Deshaun Elliott is freaking sick. That their safety number 25, that dude is all over the tape making plays, and it's tackles at the line of scrimmage with huge thump, the physicality, the speed. Like the good news is you're not going to face a lot of defenses, if any more defenses this year, that have guys that can do that. So it's not like schematically, although there were some things that Pittsburgh did very well that were smart to help limit the offense in multiple ways. You have to have the dudes to be able to do it. And Pittsburgh's dudes duded out in this game in such a major way that it doesn't actually scare me that much moving forward. Not that Washington's going to go put up 40 a game, but like what Pittsburgh did was fairly unique to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, the personnel. Like there was a play where they're kind of in a what is it, a spread out formation. Tight end's off the ball to the right. They're running kind of like a wand-up, so run's going to the right, tight end's going back to the left, and it looks like it's man coverage. And so what you're hoping is that Elliott would track with Zach as he goes back to sift, and you get it happens all the time. You get this huge gaping hole to the front side of the run because the player that's fitting the B gap is now actually the corner, and the corner doesn't recognize it until it's too late. And so instead of going with the motion, Elliott identifies the run from like 7 yards off, and he kind of starts going with the motion and just triggers downhill like an absolute maniac. Tackle for loss. Like, that's a big-time football play, and that was all over the tape. And you mentioned Queen. Like, I came into this game thinking, man, like, he really misses Roquan Smith. He's not playing as well, and he was an absolute nightmare. He's physical, downhill. He's running sideline to sideline. He's getting under stuff in coverage, which he's like usually has a hard time with that, but he's getting great depth. So, just like the offense, you got to give them a lot of credit. You got to give a lot of credit to the defense in terms of how well they played. And we mentioned Cam Hayward, we mentioned Connor Benton. I cannot speak to how well those two guys played too. And it wasn't like Nick Allegretti played bad or Biotish played bad or Cosme played. Like, Cosme had some excellent blocks in this game. Those guys are just good players. Right. And it was like you're going to lose the whole reps. Defense felt that way. But
yeah. Okay, two elements specific to more schematic offense as a whole that I want to talk about before we get to Daniels and specific to his film breakdown. The first one is the running game. I would have expected a lot more Chris Rodriguez in this game, not necessarily just like on a personnel, like I love Chris Rodriguez, but like the types of runs that teams have gotten Pittsburgh on were a lot of the similar stuff that we would have expected Brian Robinson to run. Well, we learned Friday, after we had taped our preview, obviously, that B-Rob's not playing. And I'm like, well, just put Chris Rodriguez in on some of those and maybe you can hit a couple. He doesn't really play a ton. He's in at the drive at the end of the game. Bates has the hold, which is in part because of, not getting the help that he needs. But the run choices, kind of the run game in general, the execution. What did you make of how they ran the football, or more specifically, did not run the football very successfully in this game against, by the way, for context, of course, the second best run defense in EPA per play in the league. So we knew it would be tough sledding going in.
Yeah, I actually thought that first things first is that Pittsburgh had a really good plan for the run. And so what they did is they kind of were like, we're going to play an odd structure. So 3 guys inside and then 2 edge players on a lot of first downs, and then have Patrick Queen kind of be the extra guy in the middle, and then the safety is going to be the run support player. You can only do that if you play like pretty tight man coverage on the outside. So they were like, we're going to play pretty tight man on the outside. We're going to kind of play this heavier box, because like when you're in that odd structure, you can't get, so when you're running a Wanda run, you're always trying to get that those 2 double teams inside to the linebackers. And in the 4 down front, you can, because the tight end can cut the backside guy out. The tackle reaches the front side guy. You get 2 double teams inside. So now you have 1 double team. And it's going to a player that's actually behind you in terms of where the run should be going. And so there's a lot of times where Patrick Queen, you just can't get the combination to him. And he's just going to run downhill and make the tackle. And so I thought that was a really good plan. Obviously there's a lot of pin pull stuff that the Commanders do, and it's the same type of thing. When you're in that structure, that kind of bear, jam-ish type structure, the combinations get a little bit weird. The pulls get a little bit harder. Like there's a little bit more noise and bodies there. And so they did a great job. And that only happens because you're in tight man coverage on the outside. So usually, I'm sure, like base that box structure, you're throwing bubbles, you're throwing quick screens, but because they're in tight man, you can't do it as well. So you're kind of forced into running into, I don't want to say bad looks, but looks that aren't great. Stuff you'd rather be throwing the ball against. So I think that's the first thing that sticks out to me. Just the plan was very good. The plan was good, and again, it kind of gets you out of stuff that's been excellent for us this year. So we can't run as much pin pull versus that. We can't run as much GT versus that, which is probably our best run. Wanda becomes a little bit more challenging, right? All those things that we've been really good at are now very, very hard. And so, McNichols is running into kind of some tough looks. Eckler's running into tough looks. And they just had the plan. And so I've been a part of games where that's happened, and you kind of are like, well, shoot, now what do we do? Because we weren't really prepped for this, and the stuff we have up isn't great versus this. And to your point, like they obviously kind of thought this would be a sub-run game. And based on what the Steelers did versus the New York Giants, I thought it was going to be a sub-run game too. But they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to kind of be who we are, stop the run, trust that we can press outside, and force you to kind of get into some stuff that you don't want to do, which they did a great job of.
Yeah, they definitely did. And obviously we'll talk in a second about the quarterback run game element of that as well. The other thing, though, that you mentioned kind of in there is one of the potential solutions that has just turned in from a strength to like a nightmare the last couple of weeks is what is going on with the Commanders screen game? Because they can't even on the running back screen. Well, one, like the wide receiver screens, we see the obvious confusion. Like Terry and Diami both going to catch the football. Like someone missed a call, someone missed something there. Doesn't take a genius. Doesn't take a guy who played 10 years in the NFL to tell you that got messed up. I got that one. I got that one under control over here. But it feels like in the last 2-3 weeks, Logan, they can't forget like bust a big play on one. They can't complete a running back screen to Austin Eckler. Like Jayden has just consistently dirted the football because he can't find Austin. And whether someone's seen something on tape that is tipping off these plays, whether it's Austin like running into guys and not kind of getting open, whether it's those guys or he's running into guys because they're getting blocked. Like, what is it with these running back screens that has caused that part of the Commanders game that was so good and so detail oriented earlier in the year and so successful to peter out and kind of die here?
Yeah, this is one, and again, it's not on all of them, but screens are incredibly detailed. Like in the run game, there's a certain level of detail. In the pass game, there's a lot of detail. But in the screen game, to get a good screen, a lot of people got to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so what I mean by that is like, in this game, for example, like Trent Scott is he's blocking TJ Watt. And so usually on a screen, you try to minimize that rusher. So either you encourage him to run up the field, right? Encourage him to run up the field, kind of past the quarterback or see the quarterback and get really deep. And then you replace that guy with the running back. The guard is working to the player that's got the running back in man, and the center is looking for anybody in pursuit. So you create like a little pocket for the back. You've outflanked the defense, ball out, right? The other way you do it is you have, when that rusher rushes, you get to his outside shoulder so that you kind of force an inside rush. The quarterback can vacate to the right, hit it to the back, same principle. And so one of the things that I noticed in this game with Trent Scott and TJ Watt is TJ Watt was pretty good on the screens about, hey, I'm going inside. And Trent Scott, when he gets that response, needs to clamp that outside shoulder. Just keep it covered up, let the back get out, and then throw the ball. But TJ Watt, like he was kind of, I guess what I'm saying, Trent Scott's kind of in between. He's like too square on him. So when TJ gets length, he can see the back and he just runs out and tackles him basically, right? And I think Jayden Daniels did a great job of being like, no, like dirt that ball because you're right there and I don't want to throw the pick, right? Then another one, it's kind of the same thing. Like the tackle does a good job and the pursuit is just crazy to the football. It's like crazy to the football. And the guy that's what I call the rat killer can't get out in time to kind of seal that off. And so I do think there's a couple things going on here. One, I think Kliff likes to call them in certain situations, kind of like fridge red zone, like he's going to call them. And I also think the execution, and so I think teams are kind of aware of that because we've been really good at them in the fringe red zone. So like in the scouting report, it's like, hey guys, remember, fringe
alert
red,
screen.
alert screen. And the other thing is the details have gotten a little bit harder to execute now because teams are aware of it. But I think when you look at Kansas City as an excellent screen running team, their details are always very good. And it's just, I think to me, it's about kind of reinforcing some of those details and then also maybe calling them in different situations than you would normally call them to kind of maximize those opportunities a little bit more.
Yeah, because I think the hard part about not having them is it is both easy completions and maybe like, okay, we only got 8 yards, but like, hey, an 8-yard gain's an 8-yard gain. Take that.
Yeah.
But it's also in a weird way a shot play. Like those can go for big gains, and so you're killing both things that will keep your offense on schedule and even ahead of the chains, and also big play opportunities. And so they're extra hurtful when they don't work, and then you get stuck behind the chains, and it just feels like a waste of a play. So hopefully they can get that cleaned up. Anything else on either the run game or anything else from the offense that's non-Jayden specific that we want to hit real quick?
Yeah, we talked about Trent Scott a little bit. I think it's important to point out that in pass protection, I thought he had a very competitive day. And I think he's a guy that we were all a little bit worried about. TJ Watt, and I think Kliff did a great job helping him out. But very, like he did good testament to himself. I think one of the things that stuck out and something you talked about was like in the run game, just the relationship between him and Bates or him and Cosme was just not as sharp. And that's the issue is you get a guy who's a pretty competitive football player, a guy that can come in and help you win a football game, but he doesn't have the same reps that Wiley has or Lucas has with that starting group. So I think that's where you saw a little bit of the friction. And talking about the run game, like you see some of Coleman's inexperience. You see some of Trent Scott's lack of reps with the guys that he's working with, right? So all those things were kind of, I think, contributed. I think Pittsburgh did a good job, but those were two other variables that I think jumped out when you watch the film.
Yeah. Also, he's just not quite as powerful and doesn't have quite the punch. So, like on the Bates hold, he just doesn't get a good punch. And so John is like, his job is to hold until Bates can get there, and he doesn't do it. And so Bates is behind, and he winds up holding. And
well, that's what I'm talking about, like with the reps. So like that's one where I understand, like, hey, this is a tight 5, right? For me, I got to kind of take a more square step, and I can be patient to this linebacker running downhill. And so Wiley actually is really, really good in the run game because he's super bendy, he's super flexible, and he's quick. So like everyone thinks you got to be big, kind of hulking guy. The better guys are quick kind of wrestler types because I can ricochet block this 5 technique, and then I'm athletic enough when this linebacker triggers downhill to kind of get my hat across and be in the right position. And I felt like that's, again, where – and I'm not mad at Trent Scott because he just doesn't have the reps. Like he's not going to take the reps with Bates because he's not going to play. And so I think that's where, again, like you don't think about those things, but just those relationships and the timing of the run game becomes really, really important.
Wrapping up here on Take Command, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here, and let's take a look at Jayden Daniels' day. Logan, I think the first thing that we should talk about before we get to the passing game, and there's missed throws, there's drops, there's all that kind of stuff, is Jayden Daniels has been incredible as a scrambler and as a runner in general this year. Pittsburgh completely shut that down. How did they do it?
I mean, they had a great plan. I think you see their awareness of what he is and what he can do. I mean, every single time there's times where he's just doing like a handoff and he's like a token zone read fake. Like there's no blocking to support the zone read. And TJ Watt is like basically tackling him. You know what I mean? Like it's like he's not tackling him, but he's going to hit him. He's going to wrap him up. And I just thought they were like, you're not going to do this. And there is some psychology to this. Geez, there we go. To kind of get the quarterback to be like, I don't want to do this. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to pull it because they're so aware of that I've got it. So I think back to the Pittsburgh 49ers Super Bowl, right? Which was, no, not Pittsburgh, the Baltimore 49ers Super Bowl a couple years ago. A couple years ago now, it was probably like 2013 or 12. And Colin Kaepernick was lighting the NFL on fire with the quarterback run stuff. And Baltimore was basically like, you know what we're going to do? Every single time he does it, we're going to hit him because he's a runner. Like that's the designation in the rule. Like you are a runner, we can hit you. And basically like it just killed that element of their offense. And I felt like they they weren't that physical with Jayden, the level that they were with Colin Kaepernick back in 12 or whatever that was. But they were incredibly aware, and they were very, very like, we're going to grab you, we're going to make you think about it, we're going to, we know, we want you to know that we know that you're thinking about doing this, and we don't want you to do it. And so there's a couple times where that awareness hurt them. Like Austin Eckler had a 10-yard run where Highsmith is beelining to him, and he hands it off, and Eckler's able to cut it back kind of in the zone that he's vacated. But I do think that to me is kind of the main thing, is they were just like, we're not going to let you do what you want to do. And and sometimes that's all it takes, is just like the defensive coordinator showing Kliff that, hey, don't do this unless you want to get your quarterback a shot to the ribs. And I know he's a little bit banged up. And I think that's to me what it felt like.
Yeah, it almost felt like, hey, if you're an edge player and you're unblocked, whether it's true zone read or fake zone read, you go to the quarterback. If you sense you're unblocked, do not worry about a read. Your read is go, and we will take care of the front side. And that's where Deshaun Elliott and Patrick Queen and all these guys that have so much speed, and obviously Cam Hayward and the eating of the box, and Keanu Benton and on down the list. These guys are so good that they can stop the run without the extra player. And so, yeah, technically you have the numbers if you're Washington, but it's like, just don't let him pull the backside and get the 40-yarder. We don't want him to get out on the edge. And I think the other thing, though, is from a scrambling standpoint. Was there anything particular that they did where he also wasn't able to escape the pocket and pick up, some of the first downs and things with his legs that we've seen keep this offense on schedule all year long?
Yeah, I think this is a good case study in showing how to rush well with 4 and rush well with 5, and the importance of compressing the pocket. Because people always talk, quick wins and unabated to the rusher, and like when you're doing defensive line stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this rush. But there's a lot of value, especially internally, if you can get quick power on a guard and collapse that pocket, right? Because like one of the things that they did a good job of was Cam Hayward's getting long arms on guys, and the pocket there's no running lane. It just perfectly compresses around him. It's almost like it's like a noose tightening around him. So the only way he can vacate is if he goes deep. And we talked about this in the pregame show, but basically, like, that's where TJ Watt hunts, right? He's the shark, that's the deep water. So you could tell Jayden's like, I don't really want to be back there, so let me try to step up, and there's no space. And there's a couple times where it looked like there was space, but they did a great job, because we talked about the 5-man rushes where they're stunting the 2 defensive tackles. He's getting pressure here, like to his left, and then they loop a linebacker around, and then he's just right in that hole vacated by the defensive line. So they just, in terms of disciplined power rushes from the interior of that group, it was excellent. And so on the sideline, you're like, because usually he does a great job getting back there. He can kind of find a little grass and then scoot out. But you could just tell that group was like a well-oiled machine in terms of being like, nope. It wasn't like they spied. It just, like, it's a thing that like Ron used to talk about all the time. Like, hey, we need to rush together. We need to rush as 4. And it never kind of happened. To me,
easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah. And to me, this was just like, you want to like clinic tape on how to do it? Like, these guys are going to be selfless. They're going to bull these guys back. They're not trying to get sacks. Like, credit to Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton, because like there's times where you could win quick, but I know I got to power this thing in and again constrict that sucker up. And it was a lot of fun. That was fun for me to watch because it's like football nerdy stuff. But to me, that's the reason that he couldn't scramble, is because they were just so aware, and they were so even TJ, to his credit. Like, usually he's ripping the edge all the time, really working. He was so disciplined with his position. Highsmith was incredibly disciplined. And so really credit to that group, because they came in, they knew where he could hurt you, and they said, you're not going to do that to us.
And yet, there were so many opportunities.
So many ops.
From a passing game standpoint, obviously, some of the throws downfield to Terry, he was not afraid of Joey Porter Jr. You want a corner who actually had a bad game? Joey Porter Jr. got torched left, right, and sideways, specifically by Terry McLaurin and Noah Brown. But obviously, there's some stuff left on the field. What do you make of how Jayden performed as a passer, both from a decision-making and an accuracy standpoint?
Yeah, I actually thought he made good decisions. There was one early in the game that was a little bit tough, but it was like this sick look, like when you see cool stuff, teams run this all the time, but basically, like, Tampa 2, they got that Mike linebacker that runs out of there, right?
Yeah.
And so what they did is Tampa did a really cool coverage thing. They kind of had the safety sitting in a 2-shell structure. They got the Mike linebacker, who was the safety in this case, dropping like it's Tampa 2, and then it actually inverts and rotates to cover 3. And so Jayden is getting ready to throw this ball like it's cover 2. It's the one that is behind Noah Brown early in the game. I think everyone's like, "Oh, that's a bad miss. That's a bad miss." To me, it felt like versus Tampa 2, that's where the ball should go. And then it's like, oh, damn, this is actually cover 3, and those are hook players, and Micah Fitzpatrick is about to pick this ball off. Let me get this to the back shoulder of Noah Brown real quick. So, like, even that recognition in that short time is pretty cool, and a really sick disguise there, honestly, by Pittsburgh. But I just the one thing I will say is he felt a little off from an accuracy standpoint, just a little bit. And there was a couple times where that pocket's compressing around him, specifically on the one to OZ, where he's kind of crossing the field. They're running like what I would call like a knife concept off a pop pass action. So they pull the guard. He's got a man beater. He's coming across the field. It kind of plays like pop pass, but the combination is knife. So through and then a dig behind it. And he does a great job kind of stepping, avoiding a little bit of a rush. His base is a little bit off. So the thing about Jayden to me is he's always able to get to a good base, but if he's not balanced in the base, sometimes the ball will just tail ever so slightly. So he kind of does a quick shuffle. His base is pretty good, but as he throws it, he kind of opens his hips and falls away a little bit because the rush is coming. And the ball is got great velocity. It's got great spin. It just kind of tails just ever so slightly to the left. And OZ is running to space, but it's got a little bit too much juice on it. It's tailing a little bit too much, and he just can't get there. And so that's a play where, and that happened probably, I'd say 5 times, where the rush just got a little bit tight. The ball comes out a little bit too fast, and we missed the throw. So
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was something that I thought during the game as well. And part of the kind of he was sped up was he was firing fastballs all over the place. And I thought his decision making was mostly really good. Like, there's not a lot of times where I'm like, oh, he missed a bunch of this, or there's like 1 or 2 where he's got opportunities that he maybe could have thrown something bigger or whatever. But like, that's every single quarterback game that we've ever watched. He mostly is going the right place with the football, but the accuracy is a little bit off. And sometimes it was just purely the velocity. And like that knife to OZ, like, just put that sucker out there where he can go catch it. Not like it's like a 10-yard pass, so it's not like you're lobbing it, Russell Wilson moonball, but like just lay it out there, let him run under it. You don't need to fire it on his body as he's running across the field. Obviously, the drop by Diami in the end zone is a horrendous drop. It hits him. You can't hit him between the numbers because he wears number 2, but you hit him in the chest. But that also, like, that was a laser beam. And it probably didn't have to be. And there's a couple of others as well where it just feels like he mentally was going, I got to get the ball out now. And it just chucks it. And I think some of the drops were that too, where his touch has been so impeccable all year long. And between the accuracy and the touch, some of the incompletions started to stack up in a way that they just haven't this year. And again, the decision-making is good. I don't think that's like a long-term problem. It was the best defense he's probably faced all year. The pocket's getting constricted. But I think that's such a astute observation, and the speeding up of it and how it manifests is like, sometimes it's just like, if you take the same decision, the same throw, and slow your arm down a half a second, you probably have a completion there.
And to me, it's like he's got such a nice compact release. It was just like how he was flicking it. Like you said, it's like I'm away from the rush and I was just a little bit too juiced. Even the one to Luke late in the game that we talked about that he kind of missed deep. Like that's a brilliant decision. Way to buy a little time. Like, great job. But like, you've done such a good job, to your point, of like just putting a little feather on it, right? Just a little feather on it, because the one thing that does allow you to do is it limits the need for pinpoint accuracy, right?
Right.
Because these are the best receivers in the world. They can adjust to that football now. Even the one OZ, if I put a little touch on it, he can take a different angle. He can adjust to that ball and make that catch. Same thing with Luke. It's a little bit of touch, like, I can make it happen for you. And again, he makes a great throw to Terry. He did some really nice stuff, tight window stuff to Noah Brown. Like, there's some good stuff in there, but there was just a little bit of, to me, I think it's reflective of kind of the whole offense. And, maybe he's such a big part of the offense, that's why you feel it. But, like the one to Zach, like, great throw to Zach over the middle of the field, and Zach, again, right in the chest and drops it. And so there was a couple of those where you're like, damn, like, and the one to Luke on the sideline, we just talked about that. Again, is that a tough catch? But is that a play that I've seen him make in practice like 30 times? Like,
and it's also a throw that Jayden typically makes. Like, it's a drop by Luke, so I'm not trying to shift blame, but also like that ball's a little bit late and inside.
Yeah.
And if it's a little bit more outside, it's obviously, I mean, you would know it's a much easier catch going on an out when you can get to keep going out versus trying to slow your body and come back inside to it. So like those are the kinds of throws that he's made pretty perfectly all year, which is why his completion percentage is outrageous. It's like 70+%. He's had the 80s, the Cincinnati game where he's in the 90s. Like he's been so unbelievably perfect all year that he finally got sped up a little bit, and he still has a pretty good game because, as you said, like the throw on the sideline. I mean, we saw some of the best deep balls that you'll see all year in this game between Russ and Jayden. The deep ball on the sideline to Terry, like that was sick. He hits that RPO to Terry on the slant to start the second half. Like that's a perfect ball. So he has plenty of fantastic stuff in this game, but it just the constriction. Everything gets a little bit tighter and sped up, and then you get a couple more incompletions than you're used to. And again, in a 1-point game, everything matters. A couple more of those, and perhaps this thing is a little bit different. Anything else to wrap up here, Logan?
No, I'm really excited for the preview on Wednesday, and I'm excited for this game, man. I'm really, really excited because, like, how do you bounce back from something like this? And I can't wait to see. Because again, I think they're going to be kicking themselves when they watch this film. Like, man, defensively we're 5 plays away. Offensively, we're 10 plays away. Like that are plays that we could make, and I think that's the thing that really sticks out to me. It's just like, man, and hopefully they take that, they're motivated, and they get after it going into this Philly game.
So we'll tackle all that tomorrow. Until then, thanks for watching and listening. Hit subscribe wherever you are doing so right now. And for Logan, I'm Craig. See you tomorrow on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.